Jenna, do you got the lobby for me if I need people let
Yeah.
in? Thanks, Jenna. All right, we'll get started in just one more minute. See if I can. It's better. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started then. My name is Rachel Sample. Again, for those of you who didn't join us last time, I appreciate your time today and hope that this session is informative for you. I am recording today, so if you have to step away or a colleague would like this information and couldn't attend, I will be sending this out afterwards. My apologies to our DV subrecipient friends and recipient friends who attended last week. The DV bonus subrecipient call. I have not sent that recording out yet. I know I need to, but I will be doing that today. So thanks for your patience on that. Today, I should start with when I asked for feedback on what you guys all wanted to learn about the Continuum of Care program as current recipients of funding. I got a little bit of mixed bag of everything. People kind of wanted to know, it seems like a little or a lot about many things. So it seemed like this was a good time to kind of just continue along the trend of what we were discussing last time to kind of frame the Continuum of Care program within the larger context of HUD and housing for homelessness individuals or homeless individuals, and you know, just continue this education before we maybe dive into the specifics of what we're going to be doing this year through the renewal competition. So next week we'll be talking more about renewal competition. And today we'll just kind of be continuing to set the stage for that conversation. I know we have a lot of new folks or turnover, you know, throughout the years. So hopefully some of this information is new. I have the mute button handy. So if you accidentally come off mute and you didn't mean to, it's okay. If you want to ask a question though, please throw it in the chat first so we know you've got a question, and then it's easier to find you later. You don't have to type your question in the chat if you don't want to. Just let us know you have one and we can stop and address it as we need to. Okay, so as I said, today we're going to talk a little bit of the history of the program for those of you maybe who are newer to receiving funding or newer to an organization who has received funding. As I understand it, in talking with our HUD field office, we have some very old grants in our portfolio. So some of your agencies have possibly been receiving this grant or a version of this grant for, you know, a decade or more. So that is, you know, those are longstanding programs when it comes to federal grants. So just give everybody a little bit of context about that. I also like to give some more information to folks about what HUD's expectations are and the competition. Every year, Howard hosts a great session. Howard's our consultant on kind of what you do during the renewal process. And I wanted to kind of frame some of what Howard goes over in the larger context of what HUD expects to see through the competition process, both from our larger Continuum of Care network efforts and from each of you as recipients of funding. Also wanted to talk a little bit about recent trends in Continuum of Care funding and some things that we are expecting in this year's competition. HUD sends us little signals throughout the year through notices and you know, informational sessions they host, or you know, one of the things I'm attending right now is an equity series that HUD has been hosting in the last couple of months. And again, it's just kind of you kind of read the tea leaves a little bit, and we use these tea leaves to help us kind of think about what we are expecting to come through in the competition. And this is just maybe some information that is news to you, or maybe isn't news to you, because maybe you're getting all of those newsletters too, and you're reading the tea leaves the same way as us. And then just a real brief on what we expect this year from HUD, in particular from what we saw last year and what we saw through the supplemental NOFO. I think those were really big indicators of some things coming, as well as some recent or new updated laws and legal issues that have kind of come through VAWA and other things. All right, so just a really brief history about the programmatic area of Continuum of Care funding. So for those of you who don't know, the COC program itself originated in 94 and then was codified in the HEARTH Act as it stands now in 2009. So really, the idea of having supportive housing funding, shelter plus care grants, things like that began back in the 90s, but there was a major update that happened in 2000 through that HEARTH Act. And in particular, the HEARTH Act really told Continuum of Care networks, so our Balanced Estate network of agencies and partners, how we were supposed to be working together. It was not just about applying for money, but it was about setting a framework for how we were to be working together as a part of receiving this money. It also kind of brought together some different grants that had been maybe funded separately, and brought them all kind of under the COC competition wing or umbrella. One of the big things that the HEARTH Act and the things that came out in the interim rule and other things that came out about the Continuum of Care program in the last, I guess now it's coming up on 15 years, is that there is a real expectation that we have a coordination between a broad network of stakeholders. So I think there has traditionally been a mindset in some federal programs that it's a very small group of people kind of making decisions about where money goes and what kinds of programs get funded. And what happened in 2009 and since then has been HUD really broadening that umbrella to say you need to be bringing in more people into this planning system, this planning network of partners to make sure that people's voices are represented, whether they're individuals with lived experience or people from diverse backgrounds, as well as just partners from other systems like workforce or education, healthcare, and the housing authorities. So it's really continues to kind of broaden that umbrella and funnel us all together to coordinate and plan together to respond to homelessness, and that the COC program is sets that framework to make sure that we're doing that. It's kind of our accountability partner in doing that. And then it also, sets up that we're going to have a competitive framework for our funding. So we are not just renewing our application every year. We don't submit for 20 million and just get 20 million. We go up against everybody else across the country, all the other Continuum of Care networks that are also applying for funding. And it makes the work that our network does, our board committees and our other committees, our regional planning councils, it makes the work of those entities really important. So while the work that each of our agencies is doing is tremendously important to the lives of individuals and it obviously creates amazing outcomes for people, there is this expectation too at a broader and higher level that we're coordinating, that we're thinking about best practices and performance and all of those things so that we're continuing to advance and improve outcomes and the work overall. So it's definitely feels very different than your traditional kind of renewal process, and it's designed that way. It's intentional. So I want to just highlight one thing that is out there and kind of also relates to something that our COC network just completed in the last 18 months as well. So Continuum of Care networks, COC organizations, Balanced Estate, we have plans to end homelessness. Where I started from in my work in Indianapolis, we had a plan. If you go to Delaware, they have a plan. If you go to New York City or Seattle, you can Google all of these different Continuum of Care organizations and see that they have some sort of strategic plan. And actually at the federal level, that happens at USICH or USICH. So the U.S. Interagency Council is the entity at the federal level who organizes partners across the federal government and regularly develops these plans. So USICH just released another version of their plan. I think this is their second 10-year plan. But they do these updates pretty regularly and kind of treat that plan like a living document. I mean, it certainly is written down, but they've been engaging with this planning work for a long time. They want to see this planning work happen at the local level. Like I said, we in the Balanced Estate have a strategic plan that our board has been working on, and that many of you who maybe participated in focus groups or other activities to help us plan for what we'd like that plan to include, participated in over the last couple of years. And the idea is that even though we write these things down, that we actually take action on them, and that these plans help our local regional planning councils and our state itself make decisions about where we want to invest resources or where we want to build capacity and things like that. So HUD really believes in and supports that we have our own plans, our own ideas, our own strategies to create our own response, recognizing that what happens here locally at our state is going to look different than what's needed in Florida or Arizona or Nevada. And it expects our board to kind of lead that effort to create and set strategy and to be informed about what the needs are of communities through that planning process. So I don't necessarily always see a direct tie between all of the language in the USICH plan and what we see in the NOFO, but the two things don't not talk to each other, I guess is what I'll say. They are certainly, you're going to see things that HUD brings forward in the NOFO that were maybe trends or themes in what was discussed in that strategic plan. So a couple of things to just know about HUD's expectations and requirements, guidelines for the continuum of care and the process that we have. So essentially the HEARTH Act updated the old McKinney-Vento Assistance Act. So those of you who've been around a long time know that there are lots of things that were created through that McKinney-Vento Assistance Act. I feel like you can point to like a ton, like I don't even want to know how many homeless assistance programs that have some tie, or how homeless preventions have some tie back to McKinney-Vento. And some of you also know there are McKinney-Vento liaisons in our schools, right? And that's what they're named after, that Assistance Act that created that first really federal response to homelessness, our first kind of federal programs that paid for supportive housing and other things to serve families and individuals who are facing housing crisis. That original funding process that was created there, like I said, evolved. And when 2009 happened and the HEARTH Act updated it, that was kind of like one of the big major updates that had happened since the McKinney-Vento Assistance Act had first come about. So really, since HEARTH has happened back in 2009, a lot has happened inside the homelessness space. There's been a lot of movement and change. HUD updated and clarified the definition of homelessness. We have clear explanations of what chronic homelessness means. And then we also have the COC interim rule, which is an update to the COC program and COC network expectations. So even though there are these big laws that exist and there's these big federal codes and things like that, it doesn't stop HUD from continuing to release guidance, continuing to tell us what, clarify rules, tell us what's important, not just in programmatic elements like this is what matches, but also in, this is literally who these programs are designed to serve. And this is, the definition of somebody's long-term homelessness with disability, meaning that they become chronic, right? So there's a lot to learn when you come into this space that's not just written down in laws. And that's one of the things that we try and do, right, is that we take this information that HUD sends out, these guidance documents and other things to kind of interpret what changes are coming and things that have happened, since the program began. So even though it doesn't feel like a lot has changed, overall, if you kind of look at how we have continued to receive clarity on who these programs are designed for, I think you can kind of see that there are opportunities for us to continue to learn more about what HUD is thinking about and how we can best kind of align ourselves with those expectations so that we continue to create opportunities for ourselves to receive more funding. So just a couple of things to know that came forward in the HEARTH Act and some things in particular. In the interim rule and in the legislation itself, we really see a lot of information coming through about what can grants pay for, right? And so those of you who are subrecipients of IHTDA are monitored, and it sets expectations that we should be monitoring for eligible expenses and how we support projects and making sure they align with those requirements. It also, we get a lot of information from HUD and expectations from HUD and these resources that tell us about how we should collect and report data. So the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, is the tool that HUD asks us to use to report this information, to collect this information. And one of the things you'll really see in the COC NOFO that trickles down to what we ask you about in your renewal are things related to your system performance measures. So we'll talk more about those next week, but we as individual partners in the HMIS system, we report programmatic outcomes, right? And those roll up into these big system performance measures. We also, report on the housing inventory count, which means we tell HUD, do we have more units of housing than we did the year before? If we did, that's a good thing. If we didn't, that's not such a good thing. Did we have more people counted in the point in time count? And they feel like this is always one that is hard because we want the most accurate count as possible. We want it to be accurate. But when we increase our numbers, that can be bad for us, which is, I think I mentioned last time we got together, sometimes counterintuitive. You'd think that when we report higher numbers of folks experiencing homelessness, that would show that we have need and, we should receive more funding. But HUD, kind of balances that inside the competition with saying, you do want to see things moving in the right direction, though. We do want to see that your programs are effective. So we ask for some of this information throughout the year because not only do we report it up to HUD, but it's actually then asked about again when we fill out our collaborative application to respond to the NOFO. We get a lot of information, year round on guidance and technical assistance. Our team here at IHCDA is responsible for getting that information out to subrecipients. And HUD continues to release those kinds of expectations and guidance, whether or not they are always formal guidance or they're just recommendations. Often you'll see HUD release a series of webinars in December to March and then ask a direct question in the NOFO about what they were asking or suggesting people do back, 6 or 8 months earlier. So these things that they're telling us, whether they're telling us in official ways or unofficial ways, all kind of set expectations, even if they don't, even if there's no monitoring being done to make sure we do them. Since the creation of the HEARTH Act in particular, we now see more organized ways to apply for funding. So we just had the supplemental NOFO that happened because of funding that was available through the COC program. And there's now the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project and the DV bonus funding. So the framework that we have for the COC NOFO has now created frameworks for other funding competitions for us to access more resources. So I think there's a certain amount of coordination that's happening because of that. And again, HUD's able to kind of use what they're saying in the field, knowing that, the biggest predictor of homelessness is former experiences of homelessness. So if we can help support young people through these YHDP programs, could we maybe prevent large numbers of folks experiencing homelessness later? So let's create YHDP and create this new funding opportunity. They're using this interdepartmental, intersystem connected USICH entity and the research that people have been doing for years about homelessness to inform new funding and create those opportunities. And to be quite honest, I think the supplemental NOFO, I don't think we're going to see that every year, obviously, because we had, that collection of dollars that was sent back to HUD. But I do think that through the pandemic, you saw in that funding application that HUD had kind of learned, like, some of our rural communities are really struggling and there aren't a lot of resources there. And what could we do to target those places? And additionally, we have some larger cities and some not so large cities or balanced estates that have unsheltered populations that they're having difficulty managing. So how can we get some of this funding out to those places and target those resources too? So the framework that the COC program set up has created these other opportunities for us to apply for funding. And then finally, as I've kind of said, maybe I've beaten this a little too hard, the NOFO is kind of our HUD's enforcement tool or encouragement tool to get us to do certain things. I'm going to talk about what some of those things are, but they really do, ask us specific questions about things that we're doing and why, and, how they're going and what we're doing to collaborate and do all these things, and then give us points for them. So if we're not doing them, we don't get those points. And obviously that makes a big difference to all of you because the more points we get, the more likely we are to be able to renew all of our funding and get more. So some of the things that we get asked about in the NOFO that relate directly back to what you see being offered through the COC network, through opportunities that IHCDA offers and the board is engaged with, are listed here. Specifically the trainings that are provided to agencies that receive funding, whether it's COC or COC and ESG, and others. You know, office hours, webinar series, development day, things like that. All of those things we get asked about, and we report back to HUD on through the NOFO process. The HMIS coverage that we have. So do we have all of the supportive housing projects in the state being counted in the HIC that need to be? How many of those agencies or partners that have supportive housing units don't have them captured in HMIS? All of that matters to HUD because, again, it's showing that we're working to create a complete and comprehensive system and that we're collecting data on all of it. That data quality and program outcomes related to the system performance measures are specifically asked about. What is our coverage of coordinated entry? Do we have outcomes and disparities in accessing resources? What are the disparities in our state? Are we looking at those disparities? Are we trying to address them? And in particular, because coordinated entry is seen as the access mechanism, are everybody who needing access to housing through coordinated entry getting that access they need? We're asked about our governance policies and procedures, our board and regional planning council expectations, with a focus in particular on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So are we including individuals at the table to help make decisions who are most impacted by the decisions that are being made, including folks with lived experience? We're asked about how we're communicating with the network through our newsletters, through efforts to engage new partners or communities, and through how we're engaging folks with lived experience. And then finally, we're asked about how we're coordinating across systems. Are we making sure people don't exit to homelessness when they exit jail or the healthcare system? Are we working with workforce development or education partners? And what are our partnerships with healthcare and public health and our housing agencies across the state? So lots of things talked about that happen, at various levels of the COC network that are all important to whether or not HUD thinks we're doing a good job and whether or not we get more money the next time we apply. So all of these things, while I will never say we only do these things to get access to resources, they may impact what types of training we offer or what new partners we're focused on bringing to the table in a strategic way, because we know that, by doing that, we gain access to more resources. So maybe it does help us prioritize certain things more so than it does make us decide to do them at all. So a couple of things I wanted to share about some recent HUD trends and COC funding. And most of this is probably not going to be surprising to anybody, but just a couple of highlights. No surprise to anybody, I hope. HUD continues to care about and will, as far as I know, continue forever to care about housing first. And housing first for everybody. Meaning, again, when we look at that equity and looking at disparities, are we truly housing first for everybody, or do we have some gaps and deficiencies? They're always going to be focused on making sure we are reducing barriers for folks of all populations and backgrounds. And I think one of the things in particular that we have seen in the last couple of years have been around survivors of domestic violence and LGBTQ+ populations, because we did have that the equal access rule that was temporarily repealed and then implemented again. And I think that was HUD's reminder to us that this issue of access and making sure people have low barriers is for everybody, regardless of their background. We're still continuing to see a focus on performance and an increased focus on performance. And I'll show you a little bit of what I mean by that in a little bit. But even though everybody is out there doing great work, if we're not able to show that in the data, HUD is going to decide to move resources elsewhere. That's kind of always been their focus. And again, because it's a competitive funding process, that's going to be kind of one of the standards of the COC program. I really think that given what we saw in the supplemental NOFO, and that we continue to see HUD bringing up and offering training series and other things out there on equity, that we're going to continue to be asked questions about and be held accountable for addressing disparities in our system. And I think one of the things that I have heard in listening to conversations about equity and disparity is that this is going to look different, region to region, on where are there disparities in your communities. And so just recognizing that these are big, large ideas, but when they come down right to it, we're executing at a local level. So, thinking to and speaking with your regional planning councils about how you're looking at these issues of equity and disparity is really important. It's not just kind of what the board is talking about, it's what's happening, on the ground. And then, continued focus on coordination with other systems. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but it really is, I think when I started working on NOFOs a couple years ago, 6 years ago now, it doesn't seem like that long, but it was, the big issue was, are people exiting from other systems into our system, and how are we partnering with them to prevent their entrance into homelessness? And now it is that, but it's also how are we leveraging resources like housing authority resources, like healthcare resources to bring capacity to our system, because to be quite honest, you all know this too, there is not enough money to serve all of the folks that we need to, and how can we bring in these other systems and their resources to support our response. So a couple things that we were bouncing this idea around, and appreciate, Howard, anything you'd like to contribute to some of this, but we know that we're gonna be seeing some specific things in project application questions for new projects that are gonna be asked. So my expectation is that we're going to continue to see new project applications maybe tweaked a little bit. Renewals are not typically, if you're renewing your project, we're not going to see like a new question pop up in your renewal application. I suppose it's possible. There's nothing that would keep them from doing it, but that's not something we anticipate. So if you are thinking about applying for a new project application and you've submitted an application, several years ago, I wouldn't anticipate necessarily you're going to be able to copy paste everything out of that. I think it's going to be pretty similar, but we'll talk more about what some of those new project application questions might be. But definitely think we're going to be asked things specifically about, what is that? How do you are determining need or gaps and disparities in your community? How are you trying to address those with your project? What lived experience, engagement, or representation is going on within your organization, within your project? How do you plan on engaging folks with lived experience in the work? Those would be the kinds of things I would probably think we'd see, but we can talk a little bit more about that too. We also have, the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act and domestic violence bonus. We know are going to be in the competition, and we expect to maybe see some potential questions related to that VAWA reauthorization in the NOFO. HUD is always going to be using the Continuum of Care program to focus on permanent housing. So rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing are going to, be the major things that they're going to choose to fund through COC program. And then as we saw, and I'll show you in a moment, the focus on housing and healthcare continues to be a trend that is a big part of the COC competition. And then, I just kind of want to particularly point to how these trends look in the actual collaborative application. So I'm going to show you a little visualization here. So in fiscal year 2021, and I know these numbers are a little bit small, so I apologize, I'll send the slides out. You'll see the largest amount of funding, and this would have been the summer of 2021. The largest amount of points in our application that we submitted to HUD asked about COC coordination, which are the kinds of questions about like, what are you doing to engage partners? How are you making sure everybody's using coordinated entry? How are you making sure everybody has access to coordinated entry? These kind of big system coordination questions. And a part of that was, of course, COVID response questions, which is why you see this larger percentage here at 59% being the number of points we had allocated in our full application that we submitted to HUD on that area. You'll see then also that we had this little purple pie chunk here, which was our system performance measure. So that's asking us particular questions about our entire state and how good are we, essentially according to HUD, how good are we at serving folks experiencing homelessness according to our outcomes? And this piece of the pie here was about 14% that year. Well, last year we saw this shift, and this shift was not really surprising. I think we all knew it was going to happen. We just didn't know if it's going to happen this year or last year. This fiscal year 2022 pie looks much more like the fiscal year 2019 pie. So this looks much more like how HUD was evaluating us before COVID than this. This idea of coordination and COVID response and all the things that everybody was doing to address homelessness during the pandemic that was, an outlier. This is really more like what we're asked about every year. So when we are talking about data and putting an emphasis or focus on that, it's because a third of the points on our big collaborative application that we submit to HUD on behalf of the COC is about whether or not we have good outcomes. And I would expect, because prior to the pandemic happening, this pie piece was getting bigger and bigger. I would expect that this pie piece could get even larger again. So this pie chart changes every year, kind of depending on what is going on with HUD and USICH and all the other big trends. But generally, we see this purple piece, as something that we would probably expect to get bigger. The other thing that you'll see here is that last year there were no, or 2021, there were no dedicated built-in points to the competition about collaboration with housing and healthcare. And last year there was a piece of the pie that was. And I would fully expect that piece of the pie to continue in 2023. And if you are an agency that is thinking about applying for new money or expansion money, so you want a new project or to expand a current project, I would strongly encourage you to think about how you would partner with local healthcare and housing authority partners in your communities or community that you serve, because I guarantee that you will have points in your new project application that ask you about how many units of housing are going to come from the housing authority and how many dollars in healthcare supportive services are going to come from another partner. We saw that in the supplemental NOFO, and we're going to definitely see it again this year. So generally, what do we expect this year, and what do we think is going to happen in the NOFO? This is, like I said, kind of reading the tea leaves, but maybe some of you pay a lot of attention to HUD notices and other things, and maybe some of you don't. So maybe this will be some good insight for you as you prepare for this summer. And really, while I'm talking about, the big application, I am talking about programmatic applications, in particular, if you are thinking about a new project. So first thing to know that is interesting, though I don't know if it'll end up playing a part or not, is that the supplemental NOFO results were released just earlier this month. So congratulations to our partners at Porter Stark, at Lafayette Transitional Housing, and at HSI Housing Services, Inc., I think it's the acronym, who received supplemental NOFO dollars for new 3-year grants that are going to serve folks experiencing homelessness in their regions, and in specifically some rural counties that are underserved. So not all the funding was allocated in that supplemental NOFO. There was about $7 million that HUD has set aside still. For some reason, we don't know why. So I don't know what could happen yet with that money, but there could be something coming down the line, or maybe we'll get another announcement in a couple of weeks with something new and exciting on that front. We have not gotten any indication from HUD that more money is coming to the balance of state, but there's nothing that would prohibit us from potentially getting another project if that were to happen. We also, through HUD, the balance of state, in partnership with the real estate team and Jeff Sangalowitz at IHCDA, we did apply for emergency housing vouchers. And these, or excuse me, not emergency housing vouchers. We applied for stability vouchers. I should change that. It should be stability vouchers. We applied for stability vouchers, and we have not received notification about those. So there could be more vouchers potentially coming. And I guess to that point, we do still have emergency housing vouchers out there, and they are needing to be leased up yet this year. So there could be a continued and ongoing focus on making sure those vouchers are leased up, in addition to allocating out the new stability vouchers. We know that HUD is going to offer another YHDP application, and we know that that's something that they have already, they have the dollars there to do it, so it will definitely happen. And we also know upon the budget that the DV bonus funding will be available again in the competition. So the couple things to know about that, and this was a great reminder from Howard this week too, is that the DV, the definition of domestic violence, was expanded in the Violence Against Women reauthorization in 2022. We can get into the nitty-gritty of that if you'd like, but I would anticipate that the DV bonus projects either new projects and or existing projects, and I would assume it would include existing projects, will be able to serve people who meet that category under that expanded definition. So it may mean that HUD in the DV bonus portion of the competition is opening up specific projects to that new definition to say, oh, let's bring in new partners that maybe serve this broader definition. But certainly know that that definition will be a part of however this funding is defined going forward. And then also just a quick note that there was a new funding category activated here that specifically relates to an eligible expenses to coordinate and facilitate emergency transfer plans, and particularly in a way that meets the confidentiality and compliance requirements of VAWA. So again, if you are a DV provider, I would take a good look at, some of this stuff that VAWA, reauthorized, participate in any continuing ed or TA that's going on about VAWA, to make sure you kind of understand what's going on there. And if you are not a DV provider, to, be looking for any trainings that we'll be providing or that you see out there from federal partners about the VAWA expanded definition. And we'll be definitely looking to provide more guidance to anybody who is interested in this new eligible expense activity to facilitate the emergency transfer plans. So we don't have a lot of guidance on that yet, but we'll certainly be releasing that information as it becomes available to us. Like I said, we will definitely be expecting new projects to be able to respond to questions about how they are going to partner with healthcare and housing agencies. What we have seen in the past is, initially it was just, are you doing this or aren't you? And what we saw in the supplemental NOFO was they are continuing to set thresholds, and that these are not bonus points anymore. These are built-in points. So your project, if you have, if the scoring card is out of 100, I would expect at least 15 to 20 points of that application are going to ask you whether or not you are partnering with housing and healthcare agencies. So definitely if you are thinking about a new project or an expansion, because an expansion to HUD, when we go and apply, even though it's attaching to an existing project, is new. So it's up there with all the new projects in the competition. They're going to want to see some of that. And it's not to say that you couldn't get a project through without a housing or healthcare partnership. It's just going to be much more difficult. And I think all of us want to do whatever we can to make things a little bit easier. And then finally, I would fully expect, like I said earlier, our new projects are going to be asked to respond to questions about how are they working with folks with lived experience? What are you doing to engage these individuals, not only in your board, but do you employ these individuals in your organization? Are you are people fully represented? Does your organization reflect the people you serve? Those kinds of questions as we continue to look at both lived experience and DEI issues. So my last couple of slides here are about what do we expect for the IRPA. So before I hop into that, I want to just ask if there are any questions. And I see a question here from Pam. YHDP is Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, Pam. That is a separate funding competition that has been happening since 2017 or 18 maybe. I can't remember the first year they offered it, but essentially it is it's a completely separate application, and COCs don't actually, when they apply, submit projects like we do in the competition for COC program. They submit a more of a narrative application, even though we submitted a lot of narrative in the COC one. But it's essentially like a very long narrative that requires you to respond to many questions about what your continuum of care network is doing to respond and respond to youth homelessness and serve youth and young adults. If you are all interested in learning more about that process, I can connect you with my colleague Jean. Jean is the leader on our team for responding to that application. I know we submitted an application last year, but we weren't selected. And we might have taken a little bit of a hiatus during COVID. I don't know that we applied in 2021 or not, since I wasn't on staff. But yeah, so if you are familiar with like youth action boards or other things, that's where the YHDP kind of comes into play. Any other questions?
Okay, it's Pam again, and I had my hand up for another reason.
Yeah, what's up?
Okay, sorry. On the chart, you had SM, the expenditure for SM something. Yeah, sorry. SPMs went from 18 to 30 or 18. Oh, wait, maybe I'm wrong. No, I'm right.
Yeah.
14 to 30%. Can you tell me what SPM stands for, please, and what the difference in funding is?
Yeah, so system performance measures, and this is about, these point allocations are about what we as a continuum of care are asked about in the collaborative application. So there is a big, long application, like I talked about last time, that we respond to. And in that application, we are specifically asked, what are you doing related to these key system performance measures? And in 2021, those system performance measure questions made up for 14% of the points. And in 2022, those questions made up 30% of the points that we responded to. So when it comes, when it comes to how exactly it relates down to funding, the lower we score on the collaborative application, the harder it is for us to fund new projects. That's the easiest way to say it.
Okay, thank you.
So to that point, though, that's one reason why you will see things in the internal renewal project application that talk about things like performance measures or yeah, sure, I can definitely talk about system performance measures. We might do that more next time, Jen, but I can talk some today. And why we ask you about, like, oh, are you participating in your regional planning council? Are you engaged with development day? Because we want to make sure that our network of COC providers are doing all of the things that help support the project application, because those are considered best practice. Those are good ways for us also to stay involved and knowledgeable about the systemic, work that's happening across the state to respond to homelessness. So that's one reason why we include questions in the renewal project application, because they relate back to those big questions that HUD is asking us in the collaborative application. If it's important to HUD, it should be important to us, is another way of saying it. So let me go back to kind of things to expect in the IRPA. So next week, I'm going to dive deeper into the renewal project application, what to expect. I'm not going to have a final copy of it yet because I don't have approval on it. But we're not making, we're not blowing it up. To be quite honest, it's quite a good renewal project application, especially considering the huge, swath of providers we have and different types of projects. It's got all the elements HUD wants to see. It's got a lot of the things that are considered, best practice. So we're not blowing it up. So if you did it last year, it's not going to be like a completely new document to you. But I will say, I'm hoping that we will have improvements to it in a number of ways. So just to give you a couple of previews for what you should be thinking about and to expect as you go to renew your project. First, we are always going to ask you questions about Housing First. We're always going to ask you about whether or not your project is aligning with Housing First and whether or not you have barriers essentially to accessing those resources. I'll skip performance measures and go that one last, Jen. How about that? We're going to ask you about HMIS data quality, so Homeless Management Information System. I hope everybody here knows that you have a data quality report inside HMIS that you can look at that lets you know if you have issues with entering data in a timely manner or not, whether if you have missing core data elements that you need reported to HUD. If we have that information, if you can, be looking at that information as an organization regularly, that will go a long way to making your renewal process easier, because you may realize, because you've got staff turnover, that nobody did annual assessments or something like that happened. And you may not realize that if you don't run your data quality report. Because to be quite honest, I mean, I've used HMIS as a practitioner, as a grants analyst and manager, and in other ways. And I know that you can't exactly just like type in like what data is missing in a question mark and get something to pull up. There is a data quality report there. It gives you lots of great information, but you need to know how to use those tools. And if you are struggling with how to use those tools or need any guidance, please reach out to us, because we're more than happy to help train anybody. Our HMIS team is fantastic and offers tons of training opportunities. So that data quality will always be important, because if the data is not there, we can't report it. And when data is missing, HUD doesn't like that. It's just like any funder, you know, they want to be able to see that the outcomes. And if they're just missing or they're not there, that's a missed opportunity. The last thing I will highlight is that we are looking at at moving things that were considered bonus points in last year's application are going to move to becoming regular points. And I say that related particularly to things around how are you engaging in your regional planning council? Are you coming to events or trying to come to events? Because I know that was an issue last year. I heard a lot about that through the process. So things like that. And again, I'll give you the details on that next week. We really wanted to address the fact that we kind of had held some of this stuff in the bonus point category during the height of COVID, recognizing that capacity, not to say that capacity isn't always an issue, but that you're not necessarily going to have all of the regional planning council meetings you had, you know, at the height of the pandemic in 2020 because people were responding to crisis. But are you engaging in your local planning activities? Are you doing what you need to do for coordinated entry? Those kinds of things that were kind of bonus are going to be built into the application this year. So when it comes to performance measures, and like I said, I'll really dive into this more next week. We are obviously still finalizing the questions. And I did touch on this in our first call. So just to lay it out on the table, I know that last year we had some issues with the way the renewal project application worked and how you were asked to report certain outcomes. So we're working with the HMIS team to clarify language so that it is very specific about what numbers are going into what calculation, to allow folks to feel like there's enough transparency there and no confusion about whether or not something is calculating correctly. So just to lay that out there, I know that's an issue and something we're addressing. The kinds of things that we ask about in the IRPA that I will expect us to ask about as we go into this year is, how well is your program getting people income? Are you increasing income or maintaining income in your program? That's going to be one. How many people from your program are exiting to homelessness or to an unknown destination? Do you have a lot of people leaving and you don't know where they go? How many people who leave your program come back to the system later because they weren't stable enough to maintain housing on their own? And the thing to know if you are new to the renewal project application process, those are probably the big three, like those would be the big three that I would hear us talk about, is that we recognize that operating a supportive housing project is not the same as operating a rapid rehousing project. The thresholds for those two things are different. So if you have not had a chance to go through this process before, understand that there's already been a built-in recognition of the fact that maintaining housing in a supportive housing project looks a lot different than maintaining housing in a rapid rehousing project. The big thing that I will encourage you to do in the next couple of weeks, if you have not done this recently though, is definitely start looking at your HMIS data, and you start with that data quality report, because if the data quality is poor and you've got work to do there, you'll have a huge leg up when we get into May, when we actually start giving you this and you're answering questions, and you what you don't want to do is have something due in 3 weeks and realize that the data that was entered 7 months ago was bad or missing. I think it's much easier to address that now. So, you know, check out those data quality reports. And if you don't understand something or have questions, reach out to the help desk. That's what they're there for. And depending on the interests of this group, you know, we could walk through an entire process where you have a chance to pull data, look at your APR, you know, clean it. I mean, at this point, you could still clean it up. And, you know, yeah, your program year is closed, but if you have, you know, missing measures in there and you need to fix that because you actually have that piece of information, you know, if you go run your data quality and it says you've got 5 people who exited, you know, with no exit destination to unknown, and you're like, wait, I know we know where everybody went. Let me get out the file or wherever it might be and fix it. You know, yeah, it's not going to be timely that you did it when you did, but it's better than not having it at all. So, you know, definitely take a look at that in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whenever it's convenient for you, because, you know, when we get into May and we're pulling this information out and having you report it, that's when you don't want to be trying to fix it, because then you're panicked about how much time you have and if you did it right and all those kinds of things. So I guess I'll just open it up for any other questions. Next week will be more of a deep dive into that renewal project application, as much as I can dive into it since it's not approved. And certainly, want to be able to offer a little bit of time during that meeting next week for any feedback that folks have about the kinds of questions that we're asking on the renewal project. So if you are somebody who's participated in this for a couple of years and you've got a burning opinion that you'd like to share, come with next week, come and share it with me, because I'd love to hear some feedback if people don't understand why we're asking something. If you feel like we're measuring the wrong thing, you know, I'd like to be able to share that feedback with our committee that approves the IRPA, that actually approves the information we fill out. Because if you guys as practitioners think there's something wrong in how we're asking a question, then, you know, either let's clarify what we're asking or let's address the problem that you see as somebody who's had to maybe submit 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5 IRPAs in the last couple of years. So yeah, that's our preview for next week, and happy to hang out for the next 10 minutes and chat with anybody who wants to talk. Otherwise, we're finished for today and appreciate your time. I'm going to turn off the recording.